Tonight, a prominent Nunavut MLA explains comments she made about the LGBTQ community. Good evening and welcome to North Beat. I'm Alyssa Mosier. A prominent MLA in Nunavut is explaining her comments about the LGBTQ Two-Spirit community. Last week, Cathy Towtongie said in the Nunavut Legislative Assembly that two-spirited is not an Inuit concept. This created a backlash. CBC's Thomas Roner sat down with Cathy Towtongie today in our Iqaluit studio for an in-depth conversation about her views and what she said.
Where you grew up, when you grew up, is very different how young Inuit are growing up now and what they're exposed to. And so I'm wondering if you can tell me a bit about your experience growing up. What was your exposure with individuals with non-normative gender or sexual orientation? Were you exposed to people like that a lot, or?
When I was growing up, it was taught to me we have Sipiyuit, transgender for women, and Sipinik for men, but it occurred at birth. My grandmother was a midwife, Inuk Pauyak, and I grew up with my other grandmother. So they spoke about that. And also when we name our children with our naming system, we can name our children after the opposite sex and treat them after the name that they carry.
I was looking up statistics about violence against members of the LGBTQ+S2 community. I found out, according to Statistics Canada, lesbian, gay, and bi individuals are more than twice as likely to be victims of violence. Bisexual individuals are nearly 9 times as likely to be sexually assaulted. Mm-hmm. Bisexual women are 7 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than straight women. Mm-hmm. And bisexual individuals are less likely to feel a sense of belonging to their community. And, you know, first of all, do these statistics surprise you, or?
An elder told me when these professionals came from the South, social services, mental services, they believe our social issues would be solved when they had their own style of Inuit social control. Remember, we come from an ancient culture. We had our own social control. If somebody was misbehaving, the elders and the community would gather together and speak to that individual or others. And that was an ancient act. But professionals came, this elder told me, we were silenced. But I am totally against. The motion was on violence, not sexuality. Let me be very clear. I'm totally against violence, including the LGBT community. No one. That's why I said we have a culture of non-interference. But the terms in Inuktitut, two-spirited, it's not an Inuit concept. It's First Nations concept or other indigenous groups. I guarantee across Alaska and Greenland, I'm at a loss. But Sipiyut, Sipiyuit. That's procreation. That's the way I understood it as an Inuk.
So to be clear, even in that Inuit worldview and approach, do you think that LGBTQ individuals have a right to be themselves in Nunavut?
The closest I could get to is non-interference. Inuit do not use the word right. They use the word responsibility. I'm responsible. Remember, our culture was based on survival, has always been on survival. It was based on a responsibility for the person's life, not a right. That's the difference of the world view. the closest I could get to on that responsibility in the Inuit prevailing authority is let them rationalize their own thought, however they may be.
This motion was about violence, and it's a fact that there are certain groups of people that experience violence more. Women,
Yeah.
Indigenous people in general, and members of the LGBTQ+S2+ community. So there are people who question or wonder why, you know, your points make sense, your points are valid. They come from your culture, your history, your experience, your knowledge, but maybe it wasn't relevant at this time. It wasn't relevant to bring up an emotion about violence.
It was a motion against violence. Let's be very specific. It wasn't a motion on sexuality. Let's be very specific. But in reading the term, Inuit has no term for two-spirited. I wanted to be very specific that our worldview, Sipiyuit, Sipinik, is included, and it wasn't. That it wasn't. I can clearly say the confusion rose in me because from my elders, I've never heard, and I was at a loss how to interpret it into my own language, into my conscience, but it was not based on sexuality.
And our thanks to reporter Thomas Rohner and our colleagues in Iqaluit for that interview.